All right, welcome back everyone. I know it's been a while, haven't had many cool diags to film, but I did end up helping a fellow Toyota technician who I met at a Toyota Quality Champion event a few years ago. I helped him diagnose this 2010 Tacoma, which I really wanted to present for you all. So I met Tim at a Toyota Quality Champion event. We sat at a dinner table together, and it was a murder mystery dinner, which was pretty interesting. His wife was asked to participate, which she did, and it was pretty funny. So when I seen Tim asking for help on Facebook, I decided to try to help out the best that I could. It just so happened that it worked out in both of our favors. So just going to jump right into this. So he has a 2010 Tacoma with a 1GRFE, if you know Toyota engines, which is a 4.0 liter, which they've used forever, and it's an amazing engine. Had a cylinder 1, 3, and 5 misfire. It also had an ignition coil B code, which I'm pretty sure either a Ford tech who was working on this before Tim, or Tim caused this ignition coil B code. But a little backstory to the car was it was worked on by a Ford Master Tech, and you should know by now that Toyota techs are a lot better than Ford techs, right? This Ford tech replaced 6 spark plugs, 3 ignition coils on cylinders 2, 4, and 6, which was odd, and neither me nor Tim could make sense of it because, again, misfires were on 1, 3, and 5. He replaced fuel injectors. He also replaced the fuel pump. He said that he found water in the fuel tank, which is the reason why he replaced the fuel pump. Now there was also a bank 1 oil control valve for the VVT system replaced. Now the Ford tech said he was unaware of that, wasn't sure why it was replaced, but the Ford tech did also replace the engine control module. I'm not sure why. So Tim gets his car. Tim does the basics. He swaps the coils from 2, 4, and 6 back into 1, 3, and 5, swapped the spark plugs. So Tim also swapped the injectors bank to bank. The misfire didn't move. And while he was swapping the fuel injectors, he wanted to look for debris or obstruction in the fuel rails. I guess a few techs have seen debris in the fuel rails causing bank-to-bank misfires. Now, Tim wasn't expecting to find anything because he was running rich on bank 1, and you would think that he would be running lean if there was any debris, but he decided to check it anyways. They were already off, which you have to lose. He also checked exhaust back pressure at the air fuel sensor hole. That was good. He smoked the intake and started spraying with intake cleaner, and I'm pretty sure he did that because bank 2 was actually 16% lean. It wasn't misfiring, but it was running lean, so he decided to check for intake leaks. He didn't find any. He also checked the fuel pressure. Fuel pressure was at 46 psi. And he also checked the IGT circuit. Now I do have a video on Toyota ignition systems where I explain this in depth. The IGT circuit is what commands the ignition coil to fire, and you can see by the waveform he didn't lose command for it to fire. So he started to check engine mechanical. He checked cranking compression, had 160 psi. He eventually used the WPS to do running compression, which was 65 psi. Did a leak down test that passed, and he also checked engine vacuum. You can see he had about 19 inches of mercury, needle steady. So all of his engine mechanical tests are coming up good. After that, he decides, to check cam timing. In my red trace here is the crank. The blue trace is the intake cam. Now this engine only has VVT timing on the intake side, so the exhaust is not controlled and it is not monitored. There's no exhaust cam sensor for this engine. But he got his cam timing waveform. We have a long cam hump, a medium cam hump, and a short one, and you can see the falling edge of the medium one lines up right with his cranksink. So we compared that to a known good, and it was dead on. Well, I don't want to say it was dead on. It was probably a degree or two off, but for the conditions he had, it was close enough. But he still needed to check his exhaust valve timing, which is when he decided to pull the valve covers off. So he removed the valve covers to inspect the valve timing. Here's our timing mark on our head, and you can see that our intake cam is slightly retarded. Like I said earlier, it's nothing to be overly concerned about. It's a pretty small amount. This here is our exhaust timing mark on our head, but you can't see the timing mark on the actual gear. So just take my word for it that it was dead on. While the valve covers were off, he also decided to check for valve clearance issues. He also decided to check and make sure that none of the valve springs were broken, and he wanted to make sure that the valves weren't bent. He did that by checking valve clearances. He suspected that if a valve was bent, the clearance would be excessive. So he didn't find visually anything wrong when he had these valve covers off. And that's when he decided to call technical assistance. So he called technical assistance a couple times and eventually got in touch with somebody who is obviously aware of these advanced tests that you can do. This technical assistance agent requested an in-cylinder waveform, but unfortunately when Tim called back, he got a different technical assistance agent who I believe escalated this case to an engineer, and the engineer said that his first impression of this waveform was it appears good. So at that point, Tim wasn't sure what to do. He had exhausted just about everything that he can exhaust, and Tim's a really good tech, so he wrote out a very lengthy description of everything he's tested, everything that the Ford tech replaced on Facebook, and I thought that I might be able to help him, so I jumped in and offered a helping hand. And like I said, luckily it worked out best for both of us. But I knew that Tim had all of the pieces to the puzzle. He had all the tech stream data, all the waveforms, videos, anything you can ask for, Tim had. We just had to put all the pieces together. So me and a few other Toyota techs were in a group chat together, and we brought Tim in to talk about this car, and we told him all we had to do was put the pieces together. We originally asked Tim about how often it was misfiring. Now Tim said it was mostly misfiring on cylinder 1 and 3, occasionally on cylinder 5. Now when this video is over, I want you all to leave a comment as to why you think cylinder 5 was not misfiring as much as 1 and 3 once you see the failure, because I actually can't wrap my head around why cylinder 5 wasn't being picked up as a misfire. But I asked Tim to look at mode 6 data for misfire counts just to get a good idea how often each cylinder is misfiring. So on TechStream, to get to your mode 6 data, you go to View Monitors, and then you hit the magnifying glass in your monitor information screen, and that will bring up your mode 6 data. You can see for our last drive cycle, cylinder 1 had 120 misfire counts, cylinder 3 had 90 misfire counts, and cylinder 5 had 30 misfire counts. So we were definitely dealing with bank 1 misfire. You can see 2 had 0 counts and 4 had 0 counts. So bank 1 was definitely the culprit. The thing is, Tim said that the misfires only happened at idle, not under load typically. And Tim also said that it was misfiring worse than the misfire counts would allow you to believe. So we knew it was a pretty bad misfire, and we knew it was definitely bank 1. So with all of the information Tim had gathered, we sat down and we figured out what we did know. We had a single bank misfire at idle. Didn't seem to misfire as bad under load. We also knew that our fuel trims were a cause for concern. Bank 1 was reading about 9% rich at idle. Bank 2 was reading about 16.5% lean at idle. We knew that Tim unplugged his AF sensors and his oxygen sensors, trying to get this thing into open loop. We figured if it was in open loop and there were any air fuel sensor issues, this thing may quit misfiring. It still misfired even with the air fuel sensors and oxygen sensors disconnected. We also knew that we did not have an exhaust restriction that may be causing it to run slightly rich. And we knew it was certainly not a fueling issue because, it was running rich on the bank that was bad. So generally when I see opposing banks, on a V6 or V8 engine, one bank is running rich and the other is running lean, I generally think of a timing issue. And I was asked why a few times, and on mass airflow sensor engines, you have a mass airflow sensor that takes the average of the mass airflow coming into the engine. But if you have a timing issue, especially on an intake timing, one bank may take a little extra oxygen, and the opposing bank may take a little bit less, but your mass airflow sensor is taking the average of those two. So when the ECM's doing its thing and calculating how much fuel to spray, the cylinder taking a little bit extra oxygen because of when your valve timing events occur, may get less fuel than needed because the calculation is based on the average, which includes the bank that is getting less oxygen than it should. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that explanation makes sense. It's hard to explain, but I hope that makes sense, and I hope you all understand why a lot of timing issues cause bank-to-bank fuel trims to oppose each other. So what's left? We knew what all Tim had checked. We knew what all was good. I wanted to get back to the valve timing because anytime I see fuel trims and it's not a fueling issue and not an air fuel issue, I really think about timing, especially when my fuel trims oppose each other bank to bank. So I asked Tim for those waveforms again because I wanted to go over them a second time, make sure they're right. So in case you don't know how we get in-cylinder waveforms, we take a hose, we thread it in a spark plug hole. We take a pressure transducer. Now this pressure transducer takes pressure and changes the pressure to voltage that we can display on a scope. So when you're doing a running in-cylinder test, you're going to get a waveform similar to this. Now, on these waveforms, you're able to see valve timing events, which is very helpful. Now, a lot of times I just use the rollers in this Picoscope software, but to make this presentation a little pretty and to make it easier for you all to see, I'm using an overlay software. So if you want this overlay software, just go to the Microsoft Store and search for pressure waveform overlays. You can get this waveform overlay software for free as long as you have Windows 10. Yeah, Windows 10. So we first looked at Tim's known good from bank 2. Now, if you're not used to looking at these, I have this blue roller here, this long blue roller. That is lined up with top dead center. Then every 180 degrees, I have another blue line. So these are your 4 strokes of the engine. This here's your expansion stroke or power stroke. I call it an expansion stroke because there's no power event taking place. There's no combustion event taking place. So it's just an expansion stroke. This here's your exhaust stroke. This here's your intake and your compression. Now, with that being said, that is where your piston is at. This is your piston on its power stroke. This is your piston on the exhaust stroke and your piston on the intake stroke. This isn't actually where valve timing events take place. So I marked out where my exhaust valve opening takes place. So you have this vacuum here in your expansion stroke, and when you see the sudden rise back towards atmospheric pressure, that is where your exhaust valve opens, because your cylinder, right before your exhaust valve opens, your cylinder has vacuum in it from the intake stroke earlier. So your intake stroke pulls vacuum into the cylinder, you compress it, but there's no combustion taking place. So when your piston comes back down, you're back into that vacuum state. So when your exhaust valve opens, you have atmospheric pressure in your exhaust stream, and you have vacuum in your combustion chamber. So basically your vacuum level in your combustion chamber goes back up to atmospheric. So when you see this sudden rise, that is when your exhaust valve opens. I have this marked at about 35 degrees before bottom dead center of my exhaust stroke. I also have an intake roller for when my intake closes. So right when you see this pressure start to rise, that is when your intake valve closes. Now, you would think that you would have compression build up as your piston's going up on the compression stroke, but you don't start to build pressure until your intake valve closes. So where you see the pressure start to rise, that is when your intake valve closes. And I have that marked out about 55 degrees after bottom dead center of the intake stroke. Now, taking those two key pieces of information and comparing them to bank 1, which is the known bad, was key in diagnosing this car. So comparing to bank 1, you can see once I added these rollers, it became pretty easy to tell what was actually taking place here. My exhaust valve opens now at about 5 degrees before bottom dead center, compared to, I believe it was 35 degrees on the previous screen. Yeah, 35 degrees before bottom dead center. So I have 20 degrees of timing difference. And my intake valve closes right around the same. I have it marked off at 59 degrees after bottom dead center. Now there's going to be a couple degrees of variation, just because, you know, I put the rollers there. There's going to be slight user error there, but my intake valve is close enough. But the exhaust valve timing was pretty substantial. So my exhaust valve was opening extremely late. It was also closing extremely late, which is what caused my rich condition. So I tried to paint this picture the best I could. I used an image off Google and tried to make the exhaust valve open to try to explain this the best I can. So during the intake stroke, you have the piston coming down and your intake valve is open. But because of the shift in valve timing for the exhaust, your intake valve is also open. So part of this, your air fuel mixture in your combustion chamber is now full of inert gas, because the inert gas is getting pulled back from your exhaust stream, basically causing an extreme EGR effect, which is what is causing the rich condition, because now your combustion chamber has inert gas in it, less oxygen than it needs. With that being said, I talked to Tim. I told him I found out what I think was the issue. I explained to him why I didn't think it was an intake valve timing issue, but I was pretty certain that it was an exhaust valve timing issue. So he took the engine back apart after he had reassembled it for me. And let's see if I can play this video. And this is what he found. So the cam is actually spinning within the exhaust gear, as you can see in the video. And this is what he found to be the cause. So the knock pin on the end of the cam gear, for some reason, was actually broken off of the cam gear and allowed the cam to spin within the exhaust cam gear, for lack of a better term. So big thanks to Tim for allowing me to help him and allowing me to share this. Tim did an amazing job, and I think Tim is now jumping in with both feet with picoscope diagnostics and in-cylinder diagnostics. I know he just signed up for Super Saturday, which is pretty exciting. Also, a big thanks to Cody at Cody's Auto Diagnostics, who recently just sent me one of his new 3D printed pulse sensors. Now, with that being said, I now have a few extra because Cody sent me one. And Tim doesn't know this yet. Hopefully he gets to the end of this video, but I'm going to send him one of my old ones because I know that he's interested in these tests now that it's saved his butt. So, big thanks to Tim. Big thanks to Cody over at Cody's Auto Diagnostics. Big thanks to Brandon for teaching me this stuff because I don't know how long it would have taken Tim to fix this car without these tests and without somebody explaining to him the results of these tests. So I hope you all enjoy it, and hopefully I get some more of my own videos here soon. But hope you all are being safe and take it easy, and I'll catch you next time.